Hello, this is Jennifer Parrish, Superintendent of Poquoson City Public Schools. I want to share with you today my proposed budget. This was presented to the school board on March 22nd in its final form. First, I'd like to review our budgeted objectives. As you see, the first one was to ensure instructional programs remain in place and enhance programs where possible. The second one states that we want to provide additional compensation to all employees and begin transition to a new teacher pay plan. What you'll see at the end of the presentation is that we've accomplished both of these objectives. Let me now talk about what's gone on since fiscal year 10, in other words, during the past 7 budget cycles. Poquoson City Public Schools has made almost $5 million in cuts out of what was originally a $22.5 million budget. We eliminated as part of these cuts 54.5 positions. That represents 20% of our current workforce. This all occurred during the past 7 budget cycles. As part of those position cuts, we cut 11 teaching positions beyond enrollment loss. So in other words, yes, we've seen a lot of enrollment loss, but we've cut well beyond that loss. In fact, we should have those 11 teaching positions back in our budget. Also, during 3 of the past 7 budget cycles, we had employees lose their jobs simply as a result of the budget cuts. We also eliminated 2 instructional programs in fiscal year 12 and 13, one at the middle school and one at the high school. Let's talk a little bit about the state funding and why we face these deep cuts. The state cut $3.2 million of its share of the Standards of Quality funding to us during the past 7 years. That represents 31% of our current state funding. The Standards of Quality are what dictate what schools must do, and they are the minimum bar for that. Now, during the past 7 years, despite the fact that we received $3.2 million in cuts from the state and its share of the Standards of Quality, we were still given new unfunded mandates. Many of these mandates were good and beneficial for our students, but they came at a cost to the locality. A great example of this is our most recent mandate. We now need to train all of our teachers in CPR, and our students must have training in that in high school before they graduate. Again, this is a good new mandate, but we had to fully cover the cost of it. As you see in the next bullet, our share of the general fund has dropped in terms of how the funding is dictated, or sent rather, to various entities of the state budget. You see here for K-12 education, we used to have 35% of that funding, and now we are at below 30%. This is shown to be correlated to the state per pupil funding, which has dropped by $800. I certainly understand why we faced deep cuts during the recession, but what you can see here is it also looks like K-12 education became less of a priority because our piece of the pie also became smaller. And finally, the last bullet highlights a fact that is of interest to many people. We rank 10th in the nation in per capita personal income, but 41st in state per pupil spending. So in other words, we are a relatively wealthy state in the top 10, but in terms of how much funding goes to our schools across the state, we are in the bottom 10. Our story with local funding has been very different than our story with state funding in the last 7 years. From fiscal year 11 through fiscal year 16, the City of Poquoson has provided our school division with additional funding to try and offset as much of the state funding loss as they possibly could. So they've provided us with over $1.2 million during the past 6 budget cycles. We use this funding to save teaching positions and also to provide the local match for state-funded raises for Standards of Quality positions. I'm going to speak to those in a later slide. They also provided some funding so we could do some compensation beyond the local match when it was possible. But it must be noted that over the past 7 years, our employees have received only a total of a 5.25% raise, clearly averaging out to less than 1% a year over the past 7 years, and it certainly doesn't account for inflation. Let me talk briefly about enrollment. We have seen a large enrollment decrease since 2006, which was our highest enrollment. We've lost 519 students since then. We have worked with the Weldon Cooper Center, which does demographics for the state, so that we can project enrollment for next year. We're projecting that we'll have a loss of 49 students. Now, we are well aware that there is some building and development going on in our community, but we cannot count for that when we do the projections for next year's budget. We have to do that on hard data. Hopefully, this number will change as some of that development occurs in the coming months. Let me talk next about our projected costs and inflationary increases for fiscal year 17. We project that we'll have an increase in health and dental insurance of $140,000, with 7.5% increase in health and a 3% increase in dental insurance. We see a slight increase to the New Horizons Regional Center. While that center provides us with the Governor's School for Math, Science, and Technology, as well as CTE programs, it also provides us with services for students with disabilities. It is in that area that we've seen a cost increase. We see a small increase for contracts and utilities, only $7,000. That'll cover an increase in electricity costs as well as lawn maintenance. And finally, you see an increase of $72,000 for VRS. We are experiencing a rate increase going into next school year. In the next slide, I'll talk about how the state's offsetting some of that cost. So our total cost increase for fiscal year 17 will be $239,000. The budget that I've proposed is based on the General Assembly budget that was approved by the General Assembly on March 11th. That budget is providing us with $15,600 in textbooks, and here you see $48,000 for VRS. This is what I mentioned in the previous slide. That helps to offset the cost of the increased rate, which led to a cost of $72,000. Now you see here we only have $20,000 coming to us for special education and regional programs. Really, that number should include another $159,000. But we've had our students in those special education programs for the past year. We've been covering the cost of that $159,000. So what we're doing now is shifting that into the unrestricted additional revenue that you see below. And then we do have an additional $20,000 that will go to special education programs. So again, the state is actually paying us for what we've already been paying out of our local budget, which enables us to do a shift of funds. You see here we get another $17,800 for preschool, and then $83,700 for a 2% compensation increase. Please know that compensation increase doesn't begin until December 1st of this year. Additionally, it only covers the increase for SOQ positions, which are not all of our positions. As I mentioned earlier, the SOQs provide the minimum requirement. Let me give you an example. According to the SOQs, we could have kindergarten classes as large as 29 students. We would never do that. Those are our youngest students, and they need to be in smaller classes. So we have kindergarten teachers that go beyond the minimum SOQ requirement. That means we need to fully cover the cost of their raise. Additionally, we have to provide a local match for this compensation increase. For the positions that are covered by the state's SOQ requirements, those minimum requirements, we have to pay a portion of that raise too. So in reality, this $83,700 does not nearly come close to covering the full cost of a 2% compensation increase for our employees. To help you better understand it, to do a 1% increase for all of our employees, it costs us approximately $150,000. So again, below you see the unrestricted additional revenue of over $333,000. So our total increase in revenue is $518,735. And this is an increase in state revenue. Let's talk a little bit about the compensation proposal that I'm including in this budget. Several years ago, we did a community survey. We had 960 people respond to that survey. 82% of those people stated that keeping salaries and benefits competitive so that we could attract and retain quality staff should be our highest financial priority. What you will see is we're making sure that is the case this year in the proposed budget. Those respondents also ranked by 88% that our greatest challenge was in fact trying to provide those competitive salaries. Once we did this survey and then created our strategic plan, as part of that plan, we have a goal to increase ranking among local school divisions for teacher pay for starting and mid-level teachers. Once we created that goal, we knew we needed to contract with folks that are experts in developing competitive pay plans. So we contracted with the Management Advisory Group, or MAG. They created a competitive pay plan for our teachers. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I do want to remind everybody that our teachers have received only a total of a 5.25% raise over the past 7 years. Also, our teachers are the lowest ranking or second lowest ranking when compared to Peninsula School Division in Gloucester at every pay interval. Again, we're looking to try and be competitive now. We know we can't move our teachers to number 1 or number 2 in comparison to the Peninsula School Divisions in Gloucester, but we certainly don't want them to be the lowest paid anymore. So as part of my budget, I'm including a plan to implement a 3-year transition for the new recommended teacher step pay plan. By doing this, we'll place our teachers on the new scale and provide them a step. By providing this step, we'll avoid compression at the start of the plan. So, for example, a teacher who's in her first year of teaching with us this year and is at number 1 on our pay plan will be on number 1 in the new step pay plan because we will now have a 0 step. So any teachers that we hire next school year who have no experience will be on step 0. If we didn't provide teachers with a step, our teachers with a year of experience would be at the same place as teachers with no experience. Our pay plan includes 170 employees, and the cost for us to transition to this plan next year will be $367,000. In year 2, $110,000, and year 3, $195,000. I'm going to talk a little bit about year 2 in a later slide, but there's a reason that we're trying to front load this as much as possible. And please know that depending on what happens in the coming year with budget and enrollment, year 2 and year 3 could look different in the future. What you see here is the actual pay plan. So you see the current plan on the far left. Next to that, our current pay. Then what the new step plan will look like and what the pay will be in the first year of the transition as we move to that plan. And then finally you see the change in compensation. And that follows for year 2 and year 3 of the transition plan. You'll notice we have some bands highlighted the new step plan in a salmon color. We have built in some compression to our plan. In other words, when given a step increase, teachers who move from step 2 to step 3 will actually receive the same amount of pay once we fully implemented the plan. We've done this to try and make this step plan affordable so that even in tight years, we can at least give teachers a step increase. Now, when we give teachers a step increase plus a raise, say for example 1%, that 1% will be applied across the entire plan, so even those in the compression years would get at least a 1% raise. As you can see here, all teachers will receive a minimum of a 2.92% raise, and the average for all teachers will be 4.11% by us transitioning to the new pay plan next year. This means we're beginning to reach the goal of our strategic plan to make sure we increase the ranking for teacher pay for starting and mid-level teachers. Many of you may be paying attention to what's going on in the school divisions around us, and many of them are giving raises that are equal to the percentage rate that we're doing, some more and some less, so we must move forward in this area this year. Again, the 3-year transition plan may be impacted by the status of the budget in year 2 of the plan, which for us will be the fiscal year 18 budget. I'll highlight this on a later slide. 2 other adjustments that we're making for next year. One comes as a recommendation of the MAG group They recommended we make market adjustments to salaries for 10 non-teacher employees. That comes at a cost of $12,386. That is part of this proposed budget. We have 114 non-teacher employees. This budget calls for a proposal to provide our non-teacher employees a 2.75% raise. That comes at a cost of $137,500. Clearly, we are providing our teachers with a greater increase in compensation, but our strategic plan specifically focuses on creating a competitive pay plan for our teachers, especially at the starting and mid-levels. So we need to move forward with it. This proposed budget includes an additional budget initiative. Currently, our paraeducators who are non-exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act work a 7-hour day. So they come in after the teachers arrive or leave before the teachers leave. Our teachers work a 7-hour and 15-minute day. I do want to stress that they are exempt from FLSA, and our teachers always work well beyond those hours, whether it is in the building, taking work home at night, or coming to the building in the weekends, or just working at home on the weekends, planning for lessons or doing grading. The budget proposal concludes the fact that we want to lengthen the paraeducator workday by 15 minutes. This means they will work a 7-hour and 15-minute day, and we'll have a little bit more time to talk with teachers or administrators before or after school about ways they can better support our students in the classroom. This additional 15 minutes will clearly result in an increase of compensation for our paraeducators. We'll pay them for the extra 15 minutes that they'll work each day. This comes at a cost of $31,000. So you may be asking, we've gotten some state revenue, but where are we going to get some other revenue? We have found some in our current operating budget. You see there miscellaneous revenue of $14,000. We're able to move some revenue from food service into the operating budget. And also we do receive revenue from surplus equipment sales. We sometimes replace computers. We'll sell our old computers and receive some funding for that. We're getting a little extra federal revenue coming into the fiscal year 17 budget. That $13,100 goes to our special ed programs. We are eliminating one support position at the savings of $25,000 moving into next year. We're capturing this through attrition, and it's a result of a programmatic change. Not a programmatic cut or elimination, just a change that enables us to do this. We're receiving $76,565 through retirement and other employee attrition. So you see here we've captured an additional $128,665. So this is a summary of the budget I've explained thus far. You see our total cost increase. The total cost of compensation comes at $499,000, or just about $500,000. The total cost of the budget initiative to move our paraeducators to a 7-hour and 15-minute day comes at a cost of $31,000. Our state revenue increase is over $465,000. Now note we did not include funding that are in fixed categories such as textbooks and preschool because we can't use those to offset those cost increases. And then here is the $128,665 I just spoke of. So our total budget shortfall is $175,000. My budget proposal includes a request for the $175,000 from the City of Poquoson. Our city manager and city council members continue to place our school division as a funding priority, which has clearly been seen by the over $1.2 million they provided in the last 6 budget cycles. It is important to note that the City Council did recently approve the City Manager's Capital Improvement Plan. This included 3 projects that may be funded for next year. For the primary and the high school, we'll be updating the HVAC systems and then refurbishing the track behind the high school so that we can hold VHSL competitions and so that it's better suited for community use. In addition, part of their approval was also to purchase a bus. So as you see here, the reason that I'm making the request for $175,000 in my proposed budget is because the state is still not fully reinvested in K-12 education. While they've provided some additional revenue this year, they have not provided all the revenue that they've cut in the last 7 years. Remember, earlier in this presentation, I mentioned the $3.2 million in SOQ funding that's been cut. I mentioned earlier that I wanted to make everybody aware of the fiscal year 18 budget. What you see here is what the VRS net cost increase will be for fiscal year 18 in terms of the budget that was approved by the General Assembly on March 11th. This does include the offset for the cost. The VRS rate is going up quite a bit for fiscal year 18, so the cost is much higher than this year. We're projecting another loss of an enrollment costing us $81,000. Clearly, this could be a different picture depending on what happens next year and then moving into fiscal year 18. We're estimating our cost increases at about $167,000, and according to the General Assembly budget, additional revenue of $294,000. So we're estimating a shortfall for fiscal year 18 to be $84,000, and that does not include any increased compensation for employees. So if we add that to the $84,000, we will be trying to find new funding next year. Again, this could change, but I wanted everybody aware of the fact that as we developed this budget, we were looking long term at what could possibly come. As I mentioned earlier, we did meet our budget development objectives. We've ensured our instructional programs remain in place. We did not use any new revenue to enhance our programs, but within our operating budget are able to enhance our course offerings, specifically at the high school moving into next year. We are providing additional compensation to all of our employees, so we're starting to move towards the goal that we put in our strategic plan, and all employees receive at least a 2.75% increase in pay. Just so you know where we're going from here, on March 30th there is a public hearing on the budget, and the school board will likely vote to approve that budget at City Hall at 6 p.m. On April 1st, we will forward that budget to City Council, and they will then move it into their budget development process. I just want to remind everybody that while this was a much better year in terms of state funding, it still was a challenging year because the state still is not fully reinvested in K-12 education. Remember, I mentioned earlier our piece of the pie still remains smaller than it did before the Great Recession. We continue to face new unfunded mandates from both the federal and state governments, and we are carefully watching what could happen for fiscal year 18. We'll be tracking enrollment. We know we have the VRS increase, and we know we'll have some increased costs that we'll have to prepare for as we do the budget development next year for the following year. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. As is always the case, please do not hesitate to contact or email me if you have any input into the budget or any questions. I truly appreciate the support that you and everyone in our community continues to provide for our schools. Thank you.